We left off on the availability heuristic, the idea that when something pops up in your mind first or easily, you think it's more likely. So a toilet, you could actually die in some kind of freak toilet accident. You have a chance of 1 in 10,000. That's very close to your chances of dying from someone murdering you. Dying in an auto accident or a malfunctioning television, actually the probability of those things happening are the same, which again, we don't often think of that. We're typically more scared of car accidents or plane accidents. We don't typically think of malfunctioning TVs. Chance of being injured by Christmas decorations, 1 in 65,000. You have a greater chance of being injured by a Christmas decoration than you do of winning Powerball. And buckets and pails injure 12,000 people a year, including some deaths, which are little babies that crawl around and maybe get their face stuck in a pail that has water, which is very sad. But again, this idea of the availability heuristic makes us think something is more probable just because it comes to mind easily. The representativeness heuristic is a little different. We think that we make a judgment or a snap judgment, or we make a quick decision, and we put a person or event in a category in which they may or may not belong. Remember the song from yesterday by Mr. Ray? You put people in a category in which they may or may not belong. So I'd write that down. Put people in a category in which they may or may not belong. Or a person or event matches a representation, stereotype, schema, or prototype in our mind. We make a judgment that a person or event matches a representation, stereotype, schema, or prototype in our mind. For example, when I see tall people, I tend to think, oh, they must play basketball. Tall people match my stereotype of basketball players. So we all have these stereotypes in our head, and when we see people or see certain events, we make snap judgments as to how those people or events fit into our stereotypes. Maybe let's say you go on a college campus and you're looking around, you don't really know anybody, but you might think, oh, that group of people looks like my type of friend. They look like the typical people I would hang out with. Again, you don't know them, they might not be very nice, but we base judgments, we make snap decisions based on how people look or how much they match a stereotype in our head. If you think about it, represent is to match, right? So the representativeness heuristic is, does that person match a stereotype in the head or a prototype typical example? I'm going to give you some more examples here by Daniel Kahneman, who's one of the foremost researchers in this topic, along with Amos Tversky. They came up with this example. Tom W. is a shy, nerdy male graduate student. He wears glasses, by the way. Is he more likely to be a computer science major or a business major? Which do you think? Most people would think, oh, that sounds like a total nerd, glasses, must be computer science. But actually, statistically speaking, there are more business majors at the graduate level, and there are not even very many computer science graduate programs. So statistically speaking, Tom is probably just a kid who's majoring in business, but he matched our stereotype of what a computer science person would look like, and so we automatically put him in that category. Here's another one. Linda's a shy woman and she loves poetry. I mean, poetry. Is she more likely to study Chinese literature or business administration? She loves poetry, everybody. Now, I know what you're thinking, at least for me, when I think someone likes poetry, I might associate them more with literature than business. But statistically speaking, she's much more likely to be business. There's hardly anyone who majors in or studies Chinese literature. And really, if you think about it, there are a lot of people who like poetry. I mean, if we went on a New York subway station, there's probably a couple of people reading the New York Times and they love reading, and there's probably at least 1 or 2 people who like poetry, but it doesn't necessarily mean we should stereotype them as people who study Chinese literature. But this is what we do. Our mind tends to make snap judgments based on stereotypes, and that's called the representativeness heuristic. Okay, so now you're going to do a couple of examples and pause the video in the form. These examples were gone over in class and were in a handout. So pause the video now, and then you are going to be doing something else in the form. And then you can come back to this video right at this spot. Okay, so you should have answered all the examples, including the one which had what kinds of deaths are more likely to occur. Let me go back to it. So out of these choices, which did you think was more deadly? Strokes or accidental death, tornado or asthma, lightning or botulism, disease or accidental death. Which is more likely? Look at this one. In Israel, does terrorism kill more people or traffic deaths? I'm going to go to those answers. Okay, so strokes actually kill more people. Asthma kills more people than tornadoes. Lightning kills more people than botulism, which is a disease that comes from food. Disease kills more people than accidents. Diabetes kills more people than accidents. And in Israel, surprisingly, traffic deaths actually are more to blame than terrorism. All right, now, I hope you got this one right, but the whole idea of the media hype, we tended to think other things were more deadly because of that media hype, and that was an example of the availability heuristic, the idea that vividness and the recency of the event makes it more likely to pop in our mind first, and so therefore we think certain things are more deadly or certain things are more populous. I hope that all that made sense to you. Now you're going to take out another piece of paper. We started a fresh piece of paper where we took notes today, and we started with anchoring. Now I'm going to use a PowerPoint to give you the rest of today's lesson. Just call it up here. Okay. And I actually had half the class close their eyes. And I asked them to answer these questions. So just jot down on a piece of paper, what would you estimate this number to equal? 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6 times 7 times 8. And then just give a guess. You don't have to actually do the math. Is the cost of the average college textbook more or less than 70 bucks? Would you say more or less? And then what price do you think the average college textbook is? And then when Mohandas Gandhi, the Mahatma, was killed in January 1948, was he older than 9 years old? How old would you guess that he was? So give me a couple of numbers here. Make sure you write something down so that it has meaning to you. I made half the class answer these questions, and then the other half of the class answered the same kinds of questions, but I switched the numbers. So instead of 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 6 times 7 times 8, I did 8 times 7 times 6 times 4, and on average, the group with this number estimated or approximated a much higher number. Then I also asked them, is the cost of the average college textbook more or less than $700? They also tended to average a higher price on the textbook. And I asked them, when Mahatma Gandhi died, was he younger than 140? This group, on average, guessed that he died at an older age. Now, technically, Gandhi died at age 78. But it's funny, I've had years where kids will say, did he die at age 9 or age 10? The smaller numbers make people guess an average that is lower than the higher numbers. Now, this all relates to a term that we talked a little bit about yesterday, which is anchoring. The idea that we focus on a small detail and we don't see the big picture. So these initial numbers, whether they were big like these questions or small, actually affected how you made judgments. The small detail of the number that I presented to you affected how you made judgments, whether you guess small numbers or big numbers. That's the anchoring bias. We focus on one aspect and we ignore others. So you might even define it as the initial estimates that you're given impact the later judgments that you make. So if you believe Louis Vuitton is, a better kind of purse, you're more likely to spend 800 bucks on it. Whereas somebody who just thinks a purse is a purse, they're going to just go to Walmart and get a $25 purse, right? So that initial way you think about something does impact how you make judgments. For me, the idea of a sale, that anchors me in. That small detail, just seeing the word sale, anchors me in. It makes me think I have to buy things. So anchoring is when you focus on a small detail and you ignore the rest. In our notes, we drew a picture of an anchor. And just the idea that in an anchor, right, it weighs you down. So we drew like a picture of an anchor and a person kind of being weighed down by the anchor. This is not going to be as good on the computer as I did on the board. All right, but we have this anchor and a person being weighed down. Their leg is being weighed down on the anchor. And the anchor, of course, is the small detail that you're focused on. And you miss the big picture. Maybe you miss the picture that you're off the boat, right, and you're going down into the water. So we're just focused on that small detail. That's anchoring bias. Sometimes also called the anchoring heuristic or the anchoring effect. By the way, the numbers 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 and 8 times, they all equal, or they both equal 40,320. But you would definitely get higher estimates in the second condition where the numbers are higher. And then both guesses for Gandhi, he was He would have almost turned 79, but he was officially 78. Again, the average tends to be different in each group. And yes, a college textbook is probably more than 70 and definitely less than 700. But again, the 700 group definitely on average guessed higher prices. All right, the next word that you want to write notes on is fixation. Sometimes we get stuck and we are unable to have a fresh view of the problem. And that's fixation. We get stuck and we are unable to have a fresh view of the problem, or unable to solve the problem. Now, the opposite of fixation is called divergent thinking. When you can come up with multiple solutions. So I'm going to go back to that slide and sort of steal this picture here. What would you say this is? Maybe you would say it's a squinting cartoon face where this is the eye and the mouth. What else could this be? Can you think of some other things? Can you use divergent thinking to come up with some other solutions of what else this could be? Some kids in class said a tombstone. Another kid in class said a thumb with some cuts on it. Someone else said this could be like a loaf of bread, like a baguette, a French baguette, like the beginning of it. Maybe you ripped off a piece. The end. This is the end. You could also maybe say that it's a soldier with his bayonet. This is the bayonet, like the back of the gun, and the dog walking under an arch. So what I would do is I would draw this in my notes under fixation and divergent thinking and come up with a couple of things. So either you feel stuck on a problem and you can't solve it, or you are able to come up with more solutions where we came up with different things, whether you thought this was more like a French baguette, or maybe you thought it was like a thumb with cuts on it, squinting cartoon face, or like I said, the soldier with the dog passing under the archway. Okay, how about this one? Do you feel like it's a ghoul, like a ghost over a fence, or do you see other things? What else do you see? Some kids, sometimes I have students say it looks like part of an elephant, maybe near water or trees. Another person said it looks like a double lane bridge with two archways and maybe some dead trees on the side. But if you look, it also looks like a custodian bent over, and their shoes, those are the smaller arches in the picture. Those are the bottom of their shoes, and their rear end is sort of the big hump, and the little sticks are like maybe the bucket that they're using to clean the floor. Okay, the next word that we're going over is mental set. A mental set, you tend to approach a problem in a way that worked for you in the past. Mental set, you approach a problem in a way that it worked for you in the past. And in this case, for example, when I was in high school, I didn't really have to study much, and I did fine. So I thought that that would work for me in college. And as you remember, I had a horrible GPA in my freshman year, 1.88, because I wasn't doing any reading. So mental sets don't always work. They may or may not be a good thing. Sometimes your strategy that you've used in the past works again, but then sometimes it doesn't. So mental set is when you approach a problem in a way that has worked for you in the past. I would write down the example of a college student who didn't have to study in high school, thinks they can keep doing that in college. That would be a good example of mental set. Now I have another example, but I'll need you to pause the video again and answer this question, because this is actually belongs to another teacher. I don't want to put it in the video. It belongs to another teacher. And then I'll go over to the next word, and you can pause and answer the question on the example for mental set. Okay, when you come back to this video, okay, we're going to talk about framing now. So framing, we tend to view things differently depending on how it's worded. We view things differently depending on how it's worded. So I think of a frame, if you think of like a frame with artwork, let's just Google frames. Certain frames can make the photo look nicer, right? And so framing is when you use certain words to make something appear more appealing. So framing, depending on how something's worded. So, for example, when we buy we don't buy fat. When we buy meat, it tends to be called lean because 75% lean meat sounds much better than here, buy some 25% fat meat or 10% fat meat. Years ago, Kentucky Fried Chicken labeled everything Kentucky Fried Chicken, but now everything says KFC because it sounds more healthy. They don't want to focus on the word fried. Again, the wording changes how you perceive it. Euphemisms really work for framing. They are substitutes for offensive terms. So instead of saying, oh, that person's lying, we'll say, oh, it's just politics. That's the political answer. Or instead of saying, I'm so sorry so-and-so died, we usually say, I'm sorry so-and-so passed away. Instead of using phrases like fat, we'll say somebody's full-figured or big-boned. You know that the Department of Defense in 1940 used to be called the War Department. But again, that sounded offensive, so we changed it to the Department of Defense. KIA stands for killed in action. And friendly fire is when you're killed by an ally or somebody who's on your side versus, right, somebody on the other side. So it makes it sound much better than someone on your own side killed you. It's friendly fire. Neutralize target sounds better than destroy, and putting an animal to sleep or euthanizing them instead of saying you killed them. My last example is years ago, this fat-free product started coming out with this oil called Olean. It was a no-calorie cooking oil. It was soybean-based, and people flipped out. They were like, no calories, fat-free. I mean, people just, slammed these Pringles. They ate the whole tin. And it sounds delicious, but in very small print, there was a little star next to Olean that said, large consumption of Olean cooking oil can cause diarrhea. So this product didn't last very long because people were eating so much of it thinking, oh, it's fat-free. But then, of course, there was the side effect of the Olean. Everything can be framed or made to sound better. The last word that we went over in class today was confirmation bias. This is where we look for information that we agree with. We look for information that we agree with, and we ignore other information. We look for information that we agree with, and we ignore other information. So, for example, if somebody has low self-esteem, they only look for the negative things. Like, I'm so dumb, and if you say, you're an idiot, yeah, I am, and then you tell them, oh, you look so nice today, and they're like, no, I don't. So they ignore or reject things they don't agree with, but they look for things they do agree with. In a way, you could call this selective thinking, right? You only listen to the things you agree with, and you ignore everything else. We played a little bit of that end of Mr. Ray's song. We sang it again because he does talk about the confirmation bias toward the end. And he says, so if you could want to play that again, it's on the wiki. All right, thanks so much.